Hey everybody, Ellie and I, the cat who's right behind my shoulder, are here today to talk to you a little bit about the first writing assignment in the course. So I want to get right into that by sharing the prompt with you. And this prompt I think is a little bit outside the box, so go with me on it. If you've been attending our Thursday sessions and you've been participating in the Genovian Constitutional Convention, this is going to make a lot more sense to you than it would otherwise. If you have no idea what this is about, go back to those materials. They're in the Blackboard modules folder under Genovian simulation, and read through all of that to get better acquainted with this fictional country, the great nation of Genovia. So the prompt asks you, as an expert now on the US Constitution, to think about how this new Genovian Constitution is essentially going to play out in real life. So let's assume that the Constitutional Convention that we had has ended, and you, the Genovian delegation, have come together and you've created this constitution, this first draft. This might not be the same constitution as the one that you ended up with in your simulation. I want that to be clear. I've made this this sort of artificial simulated constitution with some very specific learning goals in mind, so make sure to read that carefully. It's on page 2 of this document. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see it. And so the prompt asks you to help these Genovians understand what's going to happen if they adopt this constitution. So one thing I want to be very clear about is to please address your paper to the Genovian delegates. You can say, "Dear Genovian delegates, I am an expert on the US Constitution. I'm here to tell you about why your Constitution is good or bad, or maybe you should think about making some changes." And so specifically, I'd like you to consider the following 3 questions. To help these Genovians, think very carefully about these Genovian Constitutional Convention clauses, and critically, this is how to do this assignment well. Think specifically about features of the US Constitution that have been discussed in class, that have been discussed in the modules, that have been discussed in the reading. And so as you're doing that, I want you to think about the following 3 questions. First, let's think about the Genovian Legislature and Executive Council, essentially the checks and balances setup that Genovia has created for itself. And I want you to compare that with the checks and balances that the US system has. And really think about, as you're addressing this letter to the Genovians, think about explaining to them how one or neither of these choices might be a better fit for Genovia. Maybe you have a third option that would be even better. But I want you to definitely explain to the Genovians how this US system of checks and balances works by comparing it to the thing that they've created. The second thing is I'd like you to think about federalism. Or really, I put this in quotes here because, as we'll see in a moment, Genovian federalism is not really federalism at all, right? It's maybe sort of a confederal arrangement. Compare that with the US system of federalism that is talked about in Chapter 3 of the textbook. And I want you to think critically about whether or not the Genovians would be better off thinking about a system that's closer to what the US has, which is not really close to the Genovian system, or whether the thing that they've proposed would actually be a better fit for their country. And then lastly, I want you to think about Genovian rights and liberties. They've got a very short section here at the end of their constitution about some of the rights afforded to Genovians in their constitution. I want you to think about that and compare that a little bit to maybe some of the ideas found in the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment that you're going to be learning about over the span of chapters, I believe that's 4 and 5 of the textbook. Think about a little bit about this. Do you think the Genovians should consider making any additions, whether this is kind of fine as it is, or whether you foresee any potential problems associated with adopting this constitution? So throughout this, as you're answering these questions, I want you to really think about the reality of who would get what. Knowing what you know about Genovia and about these 5 regions, which you can read about in the materials if you want to get a refresher, what would happen if we put this constitution in practice? And do you think that that outcome would be good or bad? And if not, great. Maybe there's some other ideas here that the US system could tip us off to. But critically, I also want to be very clear. The US Constitution does not solve all of Genovia's problems. That's one of the reasons why I've created Genovia as the simulated country the way that it is. US Constitution is not a perfect document, okay? It never was. It's a very flawed document in many respects. And so in critically comparing the Genovian Constitution to the US Constitution, I want you to think about, take very seriously this idea that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to solving some of these political dilemmas that any constitution might have to solve, right? Maybe the US system is also not going to be the perfect system for Genovia in some respects. Maybe in other respects it's a good system. Really, I want you to get into thinking about comparing these 2 things as 2 political documents with their own histories, their own flaws potentially, and their own potential strengths as well. So really put these two things side by side and think about which one, for each of these clauses, which of the design ideas would be best for Genovia as it is. Talking about the instructions, 3 to 4 pages in length. You can go over that if you like. I don't mind it. Try to keep it maybe under 5 pages total if you're going to really get into the weeds here with some of your constitutional ideas. Another thing a lot of students ask me is, should I write this in a 5-paragraph essay format? That's not what I'm looking for. Just try to use paragraph breaks, good formatting in general. But no, I'm not counting paragraphs. I don't want to see that structure that you learned in high school. Just answer the prompt, right? So answer every component of the prompt. Try to, create a set of paragraphs, a well-organized, paper that's going to respond to everything that I've asked you to respond to. If you want to use headers, that's totally fine, but please don't use a list of bullet points. I'm not interested in a list of bullet points. Try to use good formatting. It's due on Thursday, September 24th at 10 a.m., so right before the first class section meets. That's going to be due at 10 for everybody, just because it's very hard to have 2 different deadlines in the same Blackboard site. So make sure to get that in on time before the deadline. Submit it the night of the 23rd if it's going to help you, get that done. Please make sure that you submit online only. I will not accept, obviously, any emailed copies. Please use the Blackboard submission tab. That really helps me provide feedback. On Blackboard, I'm going to be providing a very brief writing guide on how to make your assignment look nice, the way that it's supposed to look. So you'll see a good paper and an example of a bad paper. Both are fictional papers, but you'll get a chance to see that writing guide. That'll be available on Blackboard site. You don't need to provide parenthetical citations. Okay, so please don't worry about citing things. However, if you're going to reference some material from outside of the assigned course reading, which is completely not required, if you feel like you need to go to some additional source to talk about the U.S. Constitution, you can do that. However, I really don't think that it's necessary at all for this assignment. You can simply say, Dahl said, or in the textbook. It's really fine. You don't need to do any parentheticals. Really try to be creative, try to have fun. This is practice for the midterm and for the final. So don't worry too much. This is a small part of your grade, and I'm really just interested in you being creative and thinking carefully about some of the content that we've been discussing in the class. Okay, so as my cat now steps all over the microphone and me, I'd like to introduce you to the Constitution of the Democratic Nation of Genovia. You can see here they've said, first draft, be nice. And yeah, it's a first draft for sure, as you see. They've written here as well, this is a first draft, we don't have a lot of experience, so please help us out with some good feedback, right? You can see here in Article 1 of the Genovian Constitution, they set out the legislature, and in Article 2, they set out the Executive Council. They essentially have 2 pieces to their ruling governance structure. They've got a legislature that consists of a single chamber. It's got 1 body, and essentially they've got 1 person for every 5,000 Genovian citizens in each state in the legislature. People will be elected to terms of 4 years, and every state is responsible for holding votes for those representatives. So essentially, again, we've got for every, let's say that you're Genopolis, you've got 100,000 citizens. Do the math, right? You've got a certain number of delegates. If you're Western Surflandia, you've got 1 million citizens, and so obviously you've got 10 times more people in the legislature than do Genopolis. And then also the legislature creates legislation, but it must be approved by the Executive Council. So this is a 2-step process. Article 2 says that the Executive Council will be a council of 5 state leaders, so every state sends 1 person to fill in this Executive Council. They will each be selected by the voters of their respective states, and critically, there is no single person who's going to serve as president of Genovia at any time. This group of 5 is going to make all these decisions together, essentially, and serve as the head of state. Only a 4/5 vote in the Executive Council can pass legislation into law. That's a really important detail, something you shouldn't overlook. You need to get 4 out of 5 regions, essentially, or representatives of the regions to agree in order to make any laws. And so it says if this vote fails, if maybe only 3 of the 5 regions agree to do something, then the legislature has to start the process over and create a new piece of legislation or a new bill that will then get voted on there. I assume this will just be a majority vote in this group. Right, it'll be a 50% vote to send this to the council, and then the council will vote, and 4 out of 5 must agree for it to become law. Also, 6-year terms for that group. This third article is a pretty important one as well, the article about federalism. So you can see here that, I'll give you a little hint here. There's a thing in the U.S. Constitution called the Supremacy Clause, which looks a lot like this. But a lot of the details of federalism here are quite different than what we have in the U.S. system, despite this similarity. So you can see here, states can pass their own laws as long as they don't conflict with Genovian law, similar to the U.S. system. However, look at Articles 2 through 4, Sections 2 through 4. These clauses are quite different, right? State laws apply within state borders. Crossing into another state means you're subject to that state's law. Okay, that's fine. That's similar to the U.S. But here we see states may form exclusive agreements, partnerships, and trade deals with other Genovian states, but not other countries. So if you're Western Surflandia, you can form an exclusive trading partnership, or an exclusive deal, or have some exclusive shared law or shared agreement with Carta or with Pastoria. And the other states, they are not subject to that same agreement. So you can make special deals with each other. You don't have to make deals with all 5 states if you'd like. So there can be sort of sub-national deals between different groups. But the one thing is you can't do this. Each state can't negotiate independently with other countries. The fourth clause is about taxation. Every citizen is going to put 20% of their yearly earnings towards the federal Genovian government. So basically there's a national level income tax, essentially, that is a flat tax. We'll talk about that later. But every citizen, no matter how much you make, so if you make 1 million golden rutabagas every year, you're going to be giving the government 200,000 of them. If you make 100 golden rutabagas a year, you're giving the government 20 of them. States, however, do not have the power to tax their citizens, which again is very different than the U.S. case. However, every state's going to receive 1/10 of the federal budget, a flat amount. So every state gets the same amount, 1/10 of the federal budget to use as they please, and the remainder gets reserved essentially to have an army and maybe some sort of national Genovian post office or something, right? Other national priorities. So that's, again, there's some major differences in there that you're going to want to highlight. Article 4, finally, is about the Declaration of Rights of Genovian Citizens. And so this is, again, where I think we're going to start to see some major differences emerge between the U.S. system and the Genovian system. First of all adult residents of Genovia are now citizens of their state, and not the federal system. Okay, state citizenship may not be taken away by the state, but states can decide what rights citizens have. Okay, so at the baseline level, states are able to determine how each of their state citizens get to live their lives. Each state is responsible for managing and carrying out national elections within their state. So they put on the election, they host it, and they determine who's eligible as well. They get to choose who, we decide those elections. Maybe it's some sort of trial by combat, maybe it's Hunger Games, maybe it's drawing straws, maybe it's a dance-off, maybe it's a secret balloted vote, right? Well, however it works, right? Are going to determine the rules for those elections and who is eligible to participate. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, Genovian citizens living in each state will not be allowed to visit other states without an official Genovian visa, and they will not be allowed to live outside their home state. So if you are somebody who lives in Carta and you'd like to move to Pastoria, you're not allowed to do that under this constitution. You have to get some kind of special dispensation. So think carefully about all of these different design elements of the Constitution of Genovia. It's only 1 page long. They didn't get very far. But I really want you to think about how these specific clauses compared to the U.S. Constitution. Try to highlight some of those differences and think about how you might rectify potential problems that might emerge if the Genovians were to pass this Constitution, were to ratify it among the 5 regions, tomorrow. So that's the assignment. If you have any questions, please let me know. You can certainly, I would recommend you ask those questions in the forum so that other students have a chance to see my answers as well. That'd be very helpful to people, but hopefully this short video has given you a chance to really see kind of what I'm talking about, and hopefully this will be to your benefit. So have a wonderful day, have a wonderful week, and good luck with this assignment. Again, please let me know through the discussion board especially if you have any specific questions about the prompt. So long, and happy writing.